He thought he was safe in his own home. No crime, no warning. Just an ordinary evening that turned into a nightmare. Out of nowhere, men dressed as authority figures showed up at his door, demanding he leave, a place that was rightfully his. But these weren't real cops, and their target wasn't random. It was about race, about power, about fear. What followed was a clash no one could have predicted, one that would reveal both the cruelty of injustice and the strength of unexpected allies. How did it all unfold? Marcus had worked hard for years to build the life he was finally living. A steady job, a modest home tucked inside a quiet suburban neighborhood, and the peace of knowing he had carved out a space of his own. For him, that house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was proof that despite the odds stacked against him, he had made it. The front porch where he sipped coffee on mornings off. The living room filled with framed photos of family and friends. It was his safe place, his pride, his sanctuary. Neighbors passed by with quick waves, some friendly, some forced. He had grown used to the sideways glances, the unspoken question of whether he really belonged here. But Marcus refused to let that shadow his happiness. He paid his dues, kept to himself, and believed that the security of homeownership meant protection. But beneath the calm surface of his quiet street, something was brewing. Whispers of rules, complaints that seemed petty at first, small notes left on his door signed by the HOA. He brushed them off, not realizing they were only the beginning. Soon, those notes would turn into visits, and those visits would threaten not just his peace, but his very right to stay in the place he called home. At first, it was small things. An envelope slipped under Marcus's door with violations listed in bold. His grass was too long, even though it matched every other lawn on the block. His trash can was too visible, though his neighbors left theirs in plain sight. Each notice carried the same cold signature, HOA enforcement. Marcus laughed it off at first, thinking it was a mistake. But the letters kept coming, each one harsher, more threatening. Soon, the language shifted, from polite warnings to ultimatums. Failure to comply will result in fines. Then, further action will be taken. It wasn't just paper anymore. Strangers started showing up at his property. Men in dark jackets, flashing fake badges, claiming to represent the Homeowners Association police. They spoke with authority, ordering him to fix imaginary violations or face removal. Marcus felt his chest tighten each time they appeared, their words laced with something more sinister than neighborhood rules. It wasn't about a lawn or a trash can. It was about him. Neighbors peeked through curtains, watching but never stepping in. Some smirked, others shook their heads, but no one spoke up. Marcus began to realize he wasn't just being singled out. He was being isolated. Then came the knock, 3 hard pounds on his door, shaking the frame. When he opened it, the men stood tall, shoulders squared, voices booming. They told him he had 24 hours to vacate. His house, the one he worked for, the one he called home, was no longer his. Marcus's hands trembled as he clutched the so-called eviction notice. It wasn't official. No seals, no legal markings, just a piece of paper stamped with a fake emblem. Still, the threat felt real. They had power in their numbers, in their intimidation. And for a black man alone in a mostly white neighborhood, power was all they needed to make him feel cornered. Fear crept in, but so did anger. How could they do this? How could they twist rules, forge authority, and decide who belonged? He thought about calling the police, but a chilling question echoed in his mind. Would they protect him or side with them? That night, Marcus barely slept. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every flash of headlights through the blinds felt like surveillance. He sat awake in his living room, fists clenched, heart pounding, waiting for the next knock. And then, it came. This time louder, this time with more voices. When he opened the door, they weren't alone. A group of them stood together, uniforms pressed, faces hard, as if ready to drag him out by force. Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down, generations of being told where he could and couldn't exist. But what happened next was something no one on that street expected. Marcus's chest heaved as the men crowded onto his porch, their fake badges gleaming under the dim streetlight. One stepped forward, voice sharp, ordering him out. Another shoved a boot against the threshold, daring him to resist. Their eyes weren't just filled with authority. They burned with the certainty that no one would stop them. Marcus stood frozen, the paper in his hand, shaking. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was about force, about power, about erasing him from a place he had earned. Then it escalated. One of the men reached for his arm, ready to drag him out into the night. Marcus's heart thundered. He thought of his family photos on the wall, his years of sacrifice, the countless times he had been told to stay in his place. Was this it? Was his sanctuary about to be ripped away under the cover of lies? The neighbors watched from behind glass, silent witnesses to his humiliation. No one stepped outside. No one called for help. The world had shrunk to Marcus, the men in black, and the crushing weight of history pressing on his shoulders. But then, heavy footsteps echoed from down the street. Shadows moved with precision, deliberate and unyielding. 6 figures emerged, their presence undeniable, their stance commanding. These weren't imposters. These were trained warriors, Navy SEALs, men Marcus barely knew but who had heard of the injustice brewing on this block. The fake officers froze, their bravado collapsing under the sheer force of real authority and discipline. The air crackled with tension, 2 sides standing face to face. Marcus, breathless, realized he wasn't alone anymore. The question wasn't whether he would be forced out. It was whether these men would finally be held accountable. The standoff ended not with violence, but with truth exposed. The fake officers, stripped of their false authority, scattered under the weight of real power standing against them. Their threats dissolved into silence, their badges nothing more than plastic lies. Marcus remained on his porch, trembling but still standing. His home was his. His dignity, shaken but not broken, was intact. Yet the scars lingered. That night didn't vanish when the imposters left. It carved itself into his memory, a reminder that even the sanctuary he had built could be challenged simply because of the color of his skin. The SEALs who stood beside him proved that injustice could be confronted. But Marcus knew not everyone was lucky enough to have protectors arrive at the right moment. His story wasn't just about one man and a corrupt group pretending to hold power. It was about a pattern, a system that too often questions who belongs, who is worthy, and who has the right to feel safe in their own home. Marcus's battle ended with victory, but for countless others, the fight continues daily. And so, the question remains, how many more Marcuses will it take before society sees the truth? How many more doors will be knocked on? How many more lives disrupted before we recognize that racism isn't always loud? It hides in rules, in authority, in silence. Marcus's stand should not just be remembered as survival, but as a call to action, to speak out, to protect one another, to refuse to be silent witnesses. Because if this could happen on a quiet suburban street, it can happen anywhere. The real question is, when it does, will we stand by, or will we stand up?